Hi, I'm Aidan, and this is AOR Languages. This is another in my series, the Super Language Learner podcast. And now I introduce every video on camera, just to set the scene and to let you know what to watch or listen out for. I've started doing this after relaunching my channel in July and August 2024. I think you'll be able to learn a language more effectively by using my language learning checklist, also known as the repeat checklist. That's a mnemonic. It helps you to remember the different stages using the first letter. Répéter in French means to practice, very important in language learning. I recorded this podcast off the cuff, so it sounds a bit more natural and I'm speaking a bit more quickly. You can also follow the script, which is available for download. So this is my checklist for language learners. Carry out these steps to learn from media content. Now, you don't have to follow it rigidly. It's just a way of trying to define the different things that we do when we're studying and learning a language, and doing it by working with content, which is what I like to do. That's to say, reading, listening, watching. The more you read, listen and watch, the more you'll learn. So, the first stage, and of course it uses a mnemonic. The mnemonic is the word repeat, and the letters stand for certain things. So R stands for receive, that's read, listen to, or watch L2 content. Because you're receiving, whether you're reading an article or you're listening to audio or watching a video. The level should be slightly above your level. That's so that you are stretched a little bit. If it's much too difficult, you might find it overwhelming. And if it's very easy, you won't learn a great deal. It should be not too long. A few minutes, a few hundred words, in the earlier stages anyway. It's better to study small chunks. A smaller section is better. The first thing to do when you're receiving, that's when you're listening or watching or reading, is to try and understand as much as you can to get the gist. There'll be some things you don't understand. You expect that. Don't be overwhelmed by that. You always understand less in the beginning than you do later. It's important to get the gist. The overview, that's the general meaning without the detail. That helps you then to understand a greater amount of the content. You never understand everything. Understanding is learning. And even if you only understand 60%, you're still learning. Very important, this next one, is practice guessing the meaning of new words and phrases. Many course books give you the words beforehand, but it's much better to try and guess the words that you don't know as you're reading or listening and find out the meaning afterwards. Inspired guesswork is almost like intuition, something that you can develop. It can be fun just to guess the meaning of the word. Wherever possible, use both audio and written format. Many course books fail to do this, but it's very important, especially with English, that you should be able to hear as well as read, because how else are you going to know what the pronunciation is and what the intonation is as well? All my materials are presented in both audio and written format. So next we have E. That stands for extract new words and phrases. So you need to look for words and phrases that are new to you. There will no doubt be quite a few, but then you need to just select the most important ones and note them down. You don't have to try and remember all of them, but try and select the important ones, probably the more useful ones that you might use yourself. Once you've selected them, you can just check the meaning using a dictionary. I like to use Wiktionary. There's DeepL, Google Translate, or an old-fashioned printed dictionary as well. I recommend note-taking, so you can write down the word with its article or gender. You don't have to do it for English, but for French, German, Italian, Spanish, you also need to remember the gender. It's good to use the article with the word, and you'll be surprised how you can remember the gender better. Put the word in a memorable phrase to illustrate the meaning. That's very important because words really only take on a meaning when they're in context. And remembering a whole phrase can be a good way to remember the word, and the phrase itself can also be very useful. So next we have P, which stands for practice pronunciation. You need to highlight words and phrases that have a difficult pronunciation, and these are often different from the new words that you're learning. You may know the word already, but it might have a difficult pronunciation. The materials I present, the transcripts and exercises, are always in word format, so you can highlight. So it's possible to play the words in a dictionary Many dictionaries have this facility. Wiktionary does. And if you're listening to the script, if it's the audio version, the spoken version, or if it's just some spoken material, whatever it is, or a dialogue from a course book, it's a very good exercise to repeat directly after the recording. So you use the pause button, you say a phrase and you repeat directly after it. That's very good for pronunciation, because the pronunciation is coming in your ears and then you're saying it aloud, rather than you generating the sound yourself. It may not be correct. You can use phonetic writing to illustrate the pronunciation. I use a kind of maybe a little bit crude, improvised form of phonetic writing. There is also the IPA, used in nearly all dictionaries, but known by nearly no students. Break up difficult words and phrases and say aloud slowly. This is absolutely essential. A lot of people are daunted when they see a very long word, especially in German. All you need to do is just break it up and say it slowly. I do this all the time in the teaching. And when it's broken up into small pieces, it's easier to practice each one. So you say each part of the word. You might start in the middle, and then the bit before that, and then the bit after that, and gradually build it up. That's the best way to practice difficult words. Okay, that's P. Now we come on to E, which is examine interesting grammar points. Now, the word grammar has a certain effect on a lot of people. They switch off. But all grammar is just patterns in the language. So I do not recommend intensively studying grammar at the beginning. Leave it until later, once you have a feel for the language. But you should always be on the lookout for the patterns in the language. Like if I say I go, and then you say he goes and she goes, well, it's got an S on the end. Why has it got an S on the end? Well, that's the grammatical rule. You have an S with the third person, he or she. Grammar can be very confusing, and so it's best to focus on one specific grammar point at a time. Don't worry about it, because it will gradually become clearer. Because the more you consume the language and get a feel for it, gradually your kind of sensitivity for what's right will gradually build up. And don't bother with complex, out-of-context grammar exercises. I've seen some pretty awful grammar exercises that I had difficulty completing, let alone the students. So focus more on enjoying lots of listening, reading, and watching as well, or watching videos. I'll speak about the best way to watch videos and the best techniques for reading in another podcast. Now we come on to ask and answer questions. So you can use asking and answering questions as a way of practicing and processing the new content. Because what you're doing is you are listening and you're responding and you're exchanging information, which is really what language is fundamentally about. It can be difficult to create questions. You could use DeepL or Google Translate to do that for you if you don't have a teacher available. Gap fill is a kind of ask and answer because you're supplying the missing word, supplying the information, and it's good for memory training. I use that a lot in my transcripts. I often give gapped transcripts so that you can understand, you can guess, you can reproduce the word. Whenever you answer a question, remember that you need to reorder or adapt and reorder the words. Try and keep to the original words. Very often you're just putting them in a different order. Long answers are good, but short answers are okay too. But long answers are good for practicing sentence structure. And the last letter is T. Translate L2, L1, L2. So choose key phrases and sentences to translate into your L1. Don't try and translate the lot, it's too much. But just certain phrases, it's good. It's a good exercise. Be aware of word-for-word translation errors and false friends, because languages express things differently, and so be aware of the difference between your native language and the foreign language. This is a golden rule of mine. Never translate L1 to L2, that's from the native language into the foreign language, what you haven't translated L2 to L1, because very often, if you try and translate L1 to L2, you'll make mistakes. And I've seen many exams where the students are asked to do that, and they're quite difficult, and inevitably you end up getting it wrong, whereas it's much better to first of all translate from the foreign language, using that as the model, and then put it back into the foreign language, and try and reproduce the original words. Use DeepL or Google Translate to translate difficult or complex sentences, because many times there is one particular bit that's quite difficult. Well, rather than trying to get a headache trying to figure it out, you can quickly translate. Once you understand it, you learn it. And it can be good to help to memorize new words by translating key phrases and sentences from your native language back into the foreign language. It's a way of checking if you know the word. Best to do it with small numbers of words. So that's a summary of my repeat checklist. If you found this video interesting and informative, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel to receive all notifications, tell other people about it, post a comment, and please buy me a coffee.